All right, so today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into Agile project management
Yeah.
and those ever so controversial story points.
Oh, yeah.
I know you're probably thinking, not another story point debate,
Yeah.
but trust me, this one's going to be a little different.
Yeah. Yes.
We've got some seriously juicy source material for you guys today.
Absolutely.
It's a blog post called Story Points Revisited.
Okay.
And guess what? The author claims they might have invented the whole concept.
Yeah, that's right. And looking back on it,
Right.
they have some pretty strong feelings about how story points have been,
Oh, I bet.
let's just say, interpreted over the years.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty,
Right.
let's just make sure we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
What exactly are story points?
Well, a lot of people think they came from Scrum, but actually their roots are in extreme programming XP for those in the know.
Okay.
It all started with this idea of ideal days,
Okay.
like how long a task would take in a perfect world. No distractions, just pure coding bliss.
Ah, yes. The mythical ideal day.
Right.
I think we've all dreamt of that at some point.
Absolutely.
But I can see how using that for estimates might cause some issues.
Oh, yeah, you got that right.
Yeah.
Trying to translate ideal days into real-world timelines was a recipe for confusion.
Right.
Stakeholders were understandably baffled when a task estimated at one ideal day
Right.
ended up taking 3 actual days.
Right. So basically trying to predict the future with ideal days
Yeah.
was a bit of a disaster.
Yeah, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
And that's where story points came in.
Okay.
The idea was to move away from time-based estimates altogether and create a more abstract unit of measurement.
Yeah.
So instead of saying, this task will take 3 ideal days,
Right.
teams started assigning it, say, 3 points.
Okay, so it's less about precise time and more about, like, relative effort?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Story points are supposed to represent the overall complexity, effort, and uncertainty of a task, all rolled into one.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You're comparing the size of one task relative to another,
Right.
not trying to nail down an exact timeline.
Okay, that makes sense. But I'm
Yeah.
sensing a but coming here.
There's always a but, isn't there?
Yeah.
The problem is, despite the best intentions,
Right.
story points are often misused and misinterpreted.
Right.
And our author, having seen his creation take on a life of its own, has some pretty strong opinions about that.
Oh, I bet. So let's get into the juicy stuff.
Okay.
What are some of the ways story points go wrong?
Well, one of the biggest issues is comparing teams based on their story point output.
Okay.
Seems logical on the surface,
Sure.
but it completely ignores the fact that teams have different skills,
Okay.
experiences, and ways of working.
Right.
A 5-point task for one team might be a 10-point task for another.
Yeah.
And that's perfectly fine.
Right. I can see how that kind of comparison would create a pretty toxic environment.
Totally.
It's like pitting apples against oranges.
Exactly. It fosters unhealthy competition, undermines collaboration, and ultimately it doesn't tell you anything meaningful about the actual value being delivered.
So instead of encouraging teams to, like, work together, it actually pushes them apart.
Exactly.
Not very agile, if you ask me.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And this leads to another common pitfall. This obsession with actuals versus estimates.
Okay.
Teams get so caught up in trying to perfectly predict how many story points they'll complete each sprint
Right.
that they lose sight of the bigger picture, delivering actual value to the user.
It's like focusing on the scorecard instead of playing the game.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the age-old question that every stakeholder loves to ask.
Yeah.
When will it be done?
Ah, yes. The million-dollar question that no one ever wants to answer.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right.
The author argues that story points, while helpful for relative sizing,
Okay.
are a terrible tool for predicting release dates.
Okay.
Software development is inherently unpredictable.
Yeah.
There are always unknowns, dependencies,
Yeah.
and those delightful little surprises that pop up along the way.
So if we can't use story points to predict the future, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah.
How do we answer that dreaded "when will it be done" question?
The author's suggestion is pretty radical.
Okay.
Ditch the long-range estimates altogether
Okay.
and focus on delivering value in shorter cycles.
Okay. I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this short cycle approach.
Instead of getting bogged down in trying to predict what will happen months from now,
Yeah.
the idea is to pick a closer release date and pack it with as much value as possible.
Okay.
It's about breaking down those big, scary projects into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Ah, I see where you're going with this. Story slicing.
You got it.
Yeah.
But we'll dive into the details of story slicing and how it can revolutionize your workflow in the next part of our deep dive.
Great. I can't wait.
All right. Welcome back. Glad we're
Okay.
digging deeper into this. You know, it's interesting how that push for predictability can actually backfire,
Yeah.
especially in software development.
Totally. Last time we were talking about how story points can create this illusion of control,
Yeah.
making it tempting to focus on velocity instead of value.
And that's where things can get really messy.
Yeah.
Our author, who might have actually invented story points, remember,
Right.
gets pretty passionate about this point.
Oh, yeah.
He talks about how story points, when misused, can create a race to disaster for teams.
Whoa. Race to disaster. That sounds intense. What exactly does he mean by that?
He's seen firsthand how the pressure to churn through more and more story points can lead to burnout, shortcuts in quality,
Wow.
and a mountain of technical debt.
So it's like this vicious cycle where the focus on hitting those arbitrary story point targets
Yes.
actually ends up harming the product in the long run.
Exactly. And it's not just the product that suffers either.
Right.
Think about the impact on the team.
Yeah.
Imagine the pressure of constantly feeling like you're not doing enough, like you're always behind.
Yeah.
It's a recipe for demoralization and disengagement.
That makes total sense. When you're constantly stressed about hitting some arbitrary number,
Yeah.
you lose sight of the bigger picture, building something awesome and delivering value to the user.
Right. And the worst part is,
Yeah.
it's often not even the team's fault.
Right.
It's the system itself that's set up to reward the wrong things.
So how do we break out of this cycle? If story points are leading us down this dangerous path, what's the alternative?
Well, as we touched on before, the author advocates for a pretty radical shift in mindset.
Okay.
He suggests ditching long-range estimations altogether
Okay.
and focusing on delivering value in shorter, more frequent cycles.
Okay. Let's unpack that. So instead of trying to predict what will happen months from now,
Right.
we're focusing on what we can deliver, say, in the next couple of weeks.
Exactly. And remember that idea of story slicing we talked about?
Right.
That's a crucial part of making this work.
Right. Breaking those big, overwhelming stories down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
Yeah.
But honestly, I've always struggled with story slicing. How do you know when a story is sliced enough?
That's a great question.
Okay.
And it's something a lot of teams struggle with.
Yeah.
The author has a pretty neat trick he learned from someone named Neil Killick.
Okay.
Slice a story until it only needs a single acceptance test.
A single acceptance test. What does that even mean? And how does that help?
An acceptance test is basically a way to verify that a piece of functionality is working as intended
Okay.
from the user's perspective.
Okay.
So if you find that you need multiple acceptance tests for a story,
Right.
it's a good sign that it's still too big and needs to be sliced further.
So it's like a built-in checkpoint.
Right.
To make sure you're not biting off more than you can chew.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it forces you to think about the story from the user's point of view.
Right.
What's the smallest piece of functionality that would deliver value to them?
I like that. It's not just about making the story easier to estimate. It's about making sure it's actually delivering something meaningful to the user. But let's be realistic, stakeholders love their timelines.
Oh, yeah.
How do we manage their expectations if we're not giving them those big upfront estimates?
Transparency is key. Instead of promising the moon and then struggling to deliver,
Yeah.
you're constantly showing them progress,
Okay.
delivering small, tangible pieces of value,
Yeah.
and getting their feedback along the way.
It's more about building trust through consistent delivery rather than trying to predict the future with shaky estimates.
Exactly. And remember, the author suggests picking a close-in release date
Okay.
and then working backward to figure out what you can realistically deliver by that date.
Right.
It's a more iterative, flexible approach that aligns much better with the unpredictable nature of software development.
So instead of asking when will it be done, we're asking what can we deliver by this date? That's a pretty big shift in thinking.
It is, but it's a shift that can lead to happier teams,
Yep.
better products, and more satisfied stakeholders.
I'm starting to see how this all ties together. Ditching story points isn't about throwing all estimation out the window. It's about finding a more effective,
Right.
more humane way to manage work and deliver value in a complex and ever-changing world.
That's a great way to put it. It's about embracing uncertainty,
Yeah.
prioritizing outcomes over outputs,
Right.
and remembering that the goal is to build something awesome, not just to hit some arbitrary number.
You know, as we've been unpacking this whole story point saga, I can't help but think about how easy it is to get caught up in the tools and the metrics,
Yeah.
and lose sight of what really matters.
Right.
Building
Yeah.
great products and keeping our teams happy and engaged.
It's a classic trap, isn't it?
Yeah.
We latch onto these frameworks and processes,
Okay.
hoping they'll give us this sense of control in a world that's inherently unpredictable.
Right.
But sometimes the very things that we think are helping us are actually holding us back.
That's such a good point, and it really resonates with what our author, the potential inventor of story points himself, is arguing in this article.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, hey, I might have created this thing, but be careful. It's not a magic bullet, and it can be seriously misused.
Exactly.
Yep.
And what's so refreshing about his perspective is that he's not afraid to challenge the status quo,
Right.
even if it means questioning something that he helped create.
Right.
He's more concerned with finding the best way to work, even if it means letting go of familiar tools.
And that takes courage, especially in a field like software development, where there's always this pressure to be on the cutting edge, to be using the latest and greatest methodologies.
It does. But ultimately, the best approach is the one that works for your team,
Right.
for your
Yeah.
product, for your specific context.
Right.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution in software development.
Totally.
And that's something we often forget.
So true. And this whole discussion about story points really highlights that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not about blindly following the rules.
Right.
It's about understanding the principles behind the practices and adapting them to fit your needs.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And if that means ditching story points altogether,
Right.
or finding alternative ways to estimate and manage work,
Right.
then so be it.
Yeah.
The goal is to create a system that empowers your team to do their best work,
Right.
not to constrain them with arbitrary metrics.
So for our listeners out there who might be feeling a little disillusioned with story points or
Yeah.
just curious about exploring different approaches,
Right.
what advice would you give them? Where should they start?
Well, I think the first step is to really examine how story points are being used in their current workflow.
Okay.
Are they helping or hindering?
Right.
Are they fostering collaboration or creating unnecessary pressure?
Right.
Are they driving value delivery or just distracting from it?
Right.
Once you have a clear understanding of the impact story points are having,
Okay.
you can start to experiment with alternative approaches.
That's great advice. Start by understanding the problem. Then look for solutions that address the root cause, not just the symptoms.
Exactly.
And we've talked about some really interesting alternatives in this deep dive.
Yeah.
Story slicing, focusing on shorter delivery cycles,
Right.
emphasizing transparency and frequent communication with stakeholders.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, it's all about finding what works best for your team and your product.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to experiment, to try new things.
Right.
To break the mold a little bit.
That's what Agile's all about, right?
Absolutely.
Embracing change, being adaptable, and continuously improving.
And that's a journey that never really ends.
Right.
There's always something new to learn.
Right.
Some new challenge to tackle, some new way to optimize your process and deliver even more value to your users.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the world of story points,
Yes.
I want to leave our listeners with this thought.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to question the status quo. If something's not working, don't be afraid to change it. And most importantly, never lose sight of the human element in all of this. Happy teams build great products.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you today.
Likewise. And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration of the ideas that shape our world.